morning, folks. This is Deb Delapiana, and this is your Shut the Fuck Up Express style. You know, I can't tell you, when I originally started on social media, I thought it was going to be one of the greatest advances for humanity. But right now, honestly, I consider it a blight on the fucking universe because there are so many ignorant, clueless, self-absorbed people just spewing bullshit on a daily basis. You know, so we have, of course, people who love to ask those rhetorical questions on Facebook and get those open-ended answers. You know, one of the questions I saw yesterday was, if you could rid the world of one thing, what would it be? You know, you could have said hunger. You could have said homelessness. You could have said disease. You could have said politicians. But what did I see? And I'm not going to mention the person's name because there were several people. I saw the word Fauci. And just let me say to the people who wrote the word Fauci that they represent some of the most unknowledgeable, ignorant human beings on the planet. And never before have I seen someone who was simply doing his job be vilified more. Honestly, it's really embarrassing to see people in the United States talking this way when they could have picked any name out of a hat. How about the people that tried to overthrow your government? Oh, wait, are those freedom fighters really the people who wanted to reinstall Donald Trump? How about those people? How about we get rid of Steve Bannon? He's a reprehensible prick. How about him? How about Donald Trump? How about, I don't know, Ghislaine Maxwell? How about any number of people who have openly fucked over the country? Anybody? Of course not. Let's blame Anthony Fauci because we're in the middle of a pandemic that he did not create, but that you, the people, are prolonging with your ignorance. This isn't all about the politicians being bad. It's not about all the billionaires being bad. It's not about all the millionaires being a problem. It's about the people being a fucking problem. Okay? So let's be perfectly honest. I'm going to give you a little lesson in Anthony Fauci today so you understand who this guy is. By the way, if you wanted to pick a public servant to get rid of, I would have picked Dr. Gallo at NIH, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So let's talk about Anthony Fauci. He was born in Brooklyn, New York. He lived in the Bensonhurst district, which is like living in the north end of Boston, largely Italian-American communities. His father was a pharmacist. When he had enough money, he bought himself a building, and he opened a drugstore on the bottom floor, and his family lived in the apartment upstairs. Anthony Fauci wanted to be involved in public service. He grew up in an Italian-American Catholic household, very similar to my household. Okay? He went to Catholic schools. I went to Catholic schools. He got really interested in public service because the Jesuits actually preach public service. I mean, they did then, back when he was going to school. And they did in my school. I went to Catholic high school, and I went to Catholic school. Catholic post high school. I went to a 2-year Catholic college. He graduated from Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he went on to Cornell Medical School, where he graduated in 1966. He did a year of residency at New York Hospital at Cornell Medical School. And then he joined the National Institutes of Health in 1968. He has been there in public service ever since. So I'm going to have to refer to some notes here because it's copious, and I'm going to get into it. So Dr. Fauci really wanted to specialize in treating people with autoimmune illnesses, okay? And he as part of this, he also, by the way, he also was a specialist in infectious diseases, which is, exactly what COVID-19 is. Infectious disease specialists. Okay, he's the most knowledgeable infectious disease specialist on the planet, not just in this country, okay? He's respected worldwide, except for people here who have listened to Donald Trump and the administration, which means all of you clueless people, okay? The shit talkers of Facebook, that's what I call you, or the wicked losers club. So he joined the National Institutes of Health in 1968, and he was a clinical associate in the Laboratory of Clinical Investigation, which was part of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, where he is right now. He became the head of the laboratory's clinical physiology section in 1974, and he began treating patients with autoimmune diseases because the body, autoimmune diseases when the body makes abnormal immune responses against its own tissues. Okay, so that fascinated him. That's how people who go into science get when they find something they want to work in. So he also spent time while he was working in that talking to people at the National Cancer Institute, because many patients of the people working in research there would develop opportunistic infections as a result of weakened immune systems, which were caused by the chemotherapy they were receiving. Okay? Just like the people who had HIV would generally die of opportunistic infections like Kaposi sarcoma, pneumocystis, and other illnesses. Okay? So he consulted there because he thought if he could use those chemo drugs in very small doses, he might be able to suppress the abnormal immune response they were having to their own tissues without actually destroying their own immune system. So his research there also led to a lot of breakthroughs in that kind of illness, in the treatment of illnesses like vasculitis syndromes, okay, which were almost always completely fatal when people develop those problems. That may not seem significant to you, because you really don't give a shit about other people, but that was a breakthrough, and that was one of his career. By the way, he's authored 1,300 papers worldwide. Okay, so in 1980, he was named to the head of the new Laboratory of Immunoregulation. And that was at the National Academy of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, where he currently is the head. And in the early 80s, the entire nation was confronted with the AIDS problem. And it was mostly in urban centers, and it was mostly young men. These people presented with literally severely depleted immune systems, in some cases no T cells. These people were really sick and no one could figure it out. And they had really bad opportunistic infections, and that was often what killed them. It was eventually named the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. That was after they named it, of course, the gay cancer, whatever. There was a significant uproar over that because, as it turns out, it wasn't just gay people being killed, although nobody really gave a shit when it was, except for Anthony Fauci. It was traced, the AIDS virus was traced to a previously unknown human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. Now, at the time Ronald Reagan was president, and to call the government's response to AIDS slow is an understatement. They really didn't give a shit much when it was considered the gay plague. So, because most of the initial people who were getting sick from this were either gay people or people with IV drug abuse problems, people began to suspect almost immediately that the government had no intention of helping them. They were prejudiced against them, and they were a stigmatized community. And the gay community became very hostile. They had the ACT UP group. It was actually really quite effective. And in the middle of all of this, he was named the director of NIAID because the previous director had accepted another position. And many people recommended Dr. Fauci to take his place, and he did. He took the job with the agreement that he be permitted to continue his research as the chief of the laboratory of immunoregulation, as well as seeing patients. So while he was studying the AIDS virus, he was treating patients with AIDS. He has held both of those posts ever since, and he has worked under numerous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, without any fucking problem until this Orange Jackaloon became president of the United States. Nobody breathed this guy's name. Now you people talk about him like you fucking know everything about him. So, when he took that position, he became a target of the gay community. And he, was attacked by AIDS patients. And they're, contrary to what you think, they were upset with him because the government wasn't moving fast enough to solve the AIDS crisis. They weren't given enough. They felt like they should be given experimental drugs so that they could try to prolong their lives, because they knew that this illness was 100% fatality, okay? 100% fatality, okay? So Anthony Fauci, instead of shutting the door on these people, actually opened the door. And he is the person who said that the AIDS epidemic required gay people be at the table because they were the people most affected by this illness. What the people were really upset about is the exact opposite of what people are upset about today. They were upset about the fact that it was going to be multi-years of experiments in order to develop drugs to treat AIDS. So they wanted it to be sped up, whereas you people wanted to be slowed down, made non-existent. They had almost 815,000 people dead in the United States right now. But no, not you. You don't want to think that way, do you? No. So, as a result of the fact that people really thought the government was stymieing them, and I do believe the Reagan administration was slow to respond. I had several friends die of AIDS, okay? I worked with a couple of them. I hung out with a couple of them. So, I never caught AIDS. I never had AIDS. I never actually had anybody in my inner circle of gay friends, gay men that I know, die of AIDS. And as far as I'm concerned, they dodged a goddamn bullet because they lived a pretty, shall we say, partner-filled lifestyle. But I did have people that I worked with and hung out with in a different crowd that did die of AIDS. I actually have one person that I know right now that I've managed to make a connection with, actually looking into some of this stuff, who is now in his mid-60s, who is living with AIDS still, okay? And he contracted it when he was young. So Fauci opened his door to people with AIDS, and he built relationships with these people, including Larry Kramer, who was one of his chief critics. Larry Kramer lived to be in his 80s with AIDS, okay? If you don't know Larry Kramer, look him up. That's not what this is about. So he did not shy away from the challenge in any way. He traveled around the country to meet with AIDS patients, to get their stories, and he met with their doctors, okay? He met with activist groups. He created channels of access to experimental drugs. This is what the people wanted, okay? They weren't worried about dying from the drugs. They wanted to be saved from the fucking illness. And, you know, NIAID was really small at that time that AIDS hit, okay? They had a budget of roughly $320 million to fight this disease, and this disease was an unknown quantity. And Fauci was on the backs of the Reagan White House and the Congress incessantly, going after money to fund AIDS treatment, including the development of a vaccine. But it's an retrovirus, and that's difficult to do. And it is still ongoing today. So Reagan remained resistant, but the one person that did become close with Dr. Fauci was Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush. And when Bush became president, he offered Dr. Fauci the slot as director of the NIH. Dr. Fauci declined that position because he believed that his work at NIAID was more important. So let's be clear here. He turned down a pretty big job to stay where he was. So he did continue working on AIDS through many administrations. And he became very knowledgeable in that subject. And his leadership during that time led to the development of a series of drugs that have made it possible for people to live with AIDS well into their later years as a chronic illness, as opposed to being a death sentence from the day they got it. The drugs that he helped to develop actually allow these people to live their lives without actually developing full-blown AIDS. So they have found a way to suppress that immunity. The other part of this equation, which is a significant part of the equation, because what they eventually found out was that a lot of this disease was being spread through the bathhouses of New York and San Francisco. The important thing about this research is when you take HIV drugs today, it brings down the level of virus in the body to below the detectability level. And this is detected by assays, which are scientific procedures to look for this in a person's body. So that the infected person cannot transmit to his partner, to his or her partner. This is referred to as treatment as prevention. And they continue on right now at NIAID to try to figure out what they need to do to develop a vaccine. And it's a tough one. Robert Francis, by the way, who was also with the CDC during the time of the AIDS epidemic, and you will see him featured if you watch and the band played on, and I urge you to do that. If you watch, that movie, you'll see he continues today to try to develop a vaccine, so he's still working on it as well. There are people who actually do dedicate their lives to this shit. I know you don't want to believe that. You'd rather just believe he's an evil man who's trying to oppress the American public, but you're a bunch of fucking idiots. Can I just say that? You know, the fact that you can even believe any of this shit is beyond the pale for me. So, Dr. Fauci, by the way, throughout all of this bullshit, while he was being vilified by the Trump administration, has really stood tall and stood his ground on COVID-19. And he's still here, okay? And Donald Trump isn't. And Donald Trump seriously mishandled this this pandemic. And that's what's preventing it from becoming an epidemic. We have a serious problem here in this country with this pandemic, and pandemics just don't go away, by the way. This is not the first one we've ever had. We've got a long history of them, and we're going to have more. And we're being warned now. And we're being warned as global warming gets worse, so does this shit. You know, you don't want to believe any of that, because in your mind, many people think that global warming is a joke too, but you know what? Whatever you want. You know, like I continue to say, the Illuminati was a card game. And the Matrix is a fucking Hollywood movie. And that's all they really are. So, after the terrorist attacks, Dr. Fauci led the charge at NIAID to initiate a research program to develop countermeasures such as diagnostics, treatment, and vaccines for infectious agents that may be released by bioterrorists, as well as those that occur naturally, such as pandemics. This is not an uncommon thing, okay? We had the anthrax bullshit. We all know how that went. What I'd like to say about Anthony Fauci is that he accepted the criticism when he wasn't the problem. He opened the doors. He listened to people, which is something that Donald Trump seriously does not do. He listens only to the most extreme of people and the people who serve his fucking needs, okay? He has been in his position for 20 years. He has secured an increase in funding. And that's what you do when you run departments like this, okay? When I ran the promotion group at Millipore, I went in every year and looked for more funding, okay? He worked with George Bush, W, as I like to call him, who, by the way, anteed up plenty of dollars for the president's emergency plan for AIDS, and he addressed the HIV pandemic in Africa. Several million lives have been saved in Africa throughout all of this time. And this is the role of people like this. Pandemics are global in scope. As I have said, a pandemic means it jumps borders, okay? AIDS jumped borders. This jumped borders, COVID-19. This is what you do. You actually do work with other nations to find solutions. You work with scientists from other nations. You share information. So let's talk about who I think from the NIH is a person I could live without. And that would have been Robert Gallo at the time of AIDS, who, when people called him, and at the time, he was supposedly an expert in retroviruses, and wanted him to get involved in AIDS research, it didn't interest him. He flat out stated, I'm sorry, that doesn't interest me. A public servant, it doesn't interest him. That's not what Dr. Fauci said, okay? So it didn't interest Dr. Gallo until it was learned that the French had discovered the HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, the HIV virus. Gallo insisted he found it first. He somehow couldn't replicate the information. And literally, Dr. Gallo stole the virus from the French using their own samples. That's a uniquely American way to do things here, because that's what we're all about. We're all about that it's all about me shit. And we're all like that, every one of us, because that's the basically community public service isn't fostered in the United States. But the I, me, mine whole thing is a big thing here. And that proves it. And you know what? This whole thing could have gone to court. And instead, the French showed a great deal of restraint and decided to announce it as a joint breakthrough with the United States. Because why? Because had this gone to court, it would have held up years of treatment. So if you want to vilify somebody, look for someone to vilify that's actually done something wrong. I'm going to tell you this right the fuck now. Anthony Fauci didn't release the COVID-19 virus, and neither did Bill Gates. Scientists who are studying its origin now, even one who suggested it probably came from a lab, has now reversed it and decided it has not come from a lab after looking at the scientific evidence. Dr. Fauci isn't doing anything wrong. He is doing his fucking job. This is his job. When we did not have this pandemic, you never saw him on the news. You never saw him in the limelight because he is a doctor who is involved in research. And that's what he does for a living. When he's called upon to act, he does. The recent director of NIH has just left. And he openly stated that he was under pressure from the Trump administration to fire Anthony Fauci. His commentary, and I will put this article in here. I'm going to put a lot of stuff in here. His commentary was, imagine if I had done that, firing the world's leading expert in infectious diseases in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. You know what, people? Get a fucking clue. Go find another target. He is not your problem. He has won many awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in AIDS, which was given to him by George Bush. All you Republican right-wingers out there. Oh, I know, he's probably now considered a rhino because, you know what? He's not extreme enough. He doesn't want to blow up the fucking Capitol building and take control of the government to reinstall a dictator. Okay, you know, whatever. You know what? I'm not going to list all this guy's accomplishments. I'm going to put this article in. You can read it for yourselves if you can read, or if you can't read. If you don't want to read, I can't fucking help you. You know what? I'm just sick of the narrative. I'm sick of the conversation. You know, you're also worried about Dr. Fauci oppressing you. You better look around you. You got a lot of oppressors out there. He's not one of them. Shut the fuck up. I'll talk to you later.